Hi, today we're going to talk about trigonometric graph. The objective is to graph a trig function with a modified period. So we're going to work on functions that look like y equal a sine of bx plus c. We already know that a is the amplitude and that c is the axis of the curve. What we're going to focus on today is that b. b is going to be what defines the period of my function. Usually we know that the sine function has a period of 360. But if we add a b here, b times x, the period becomes 360 degrees divided by b. Let's look at an example and what this changes for graphing. So my example is to sketch a graph y equal cosine of 3x for x between 0 and 360. Here we're going to focus only on the period as the amplitude is 1 and the axis of the curve is 0. So I can already put my maximum and my minimum on the graph. The minimum is -1, the maximum is 1, and my axis of the curve is at 0. We said before that if I have a number multiplied by x inside the trigonometric function, the period is going to change. So here, instead of having a period of 160, my period is going to be 360 divided by b. So 360 degrees divided by 3, that's 120. Meaning that I can put on my graph that I'm going to have a period of 120. If you remember when we graph sine and cosine, you know that we need 4 points to graph sine and cosine, so my 120 should be here. As trigonometric functions are periodic functions, I know that between 0 and 120 I'm going to have one full period, but I want to graph my function for x between 0 to 360. So I need to continue beyond 120, and I know that every 120 degrees I'm going to get another period. So at 240 I'm going to get a second period that finishes, and at 360 I'm going to get another period that finishes. So between 0 and 360 I'm going to have 3 periods. This 3 period come from the b. Here b equal 3, meaning that between 0 and 360 I'll get 3 periods. Now I know how to graph my cosine function, I know how to graph a sine function. But I notice here that on my x-axis, I need to put more marks. If you remember, usually we start at 0 degrees and we do 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and 360 degrees. But here, because we have 3x and the period is only 160, we're going to divide all of these by 3. So if I divide 0 by 3, that stays 0, of course, but 90 degrees divided by 3, that's only 30 degrees. And now I need to remember what is my function. My function is a cosine. So I start at the maximum. My first point, when x equals 0, I'm at the maximum. Now, I already did all of the work with the x-axis. The y-axis, we don't change anything. So I don't really need to think anymore. I just need to repeat the pattern of my cosine. So cosine, I start at the top, then I'm at the axis of the curve, I'm at the minimum axis of the curve, and I'm at the max again. Here, all I do is I put a point at every mark that I have on the x-axis, and I follow the pattern I have for cosine. So now I can draw my first period. So remember here that you should curve your line. It should not look like a triangle. Okay, so here I have my first period. If you remember, we said that we go from 0 to 360, but here one period I only went from 0 to 120. So I'm going to continue until I go to 360. What I'll do again, cosine is a periodic function, so I'm going to repeat this pattern over and over again. So I start at the top, I go to the axis of the curve, minimum, axis of the curve, top. And once again, I continue, axis of the curve, minimum, axis of the curve, top. Here I put it wrong, it should be there. Okay, once again, I just follow my mark on the x-axis and I put the point where it should be by following that pattern. So if I continue drawing, it should look something like this. After you are done graphing, a good practice is to go on Desmos and to check your graph. In order to look at your graph on Desmos, you're going to have to change a few settings. To do that, go on the top right and click on the key. Now you can change the unit from radians to degree because we are working in degrees. For the domain, we want to see our domain from 0 to 360. In order to do that, I'm going to go from -10 to 370 so that I can see my full domain. The last thing to change is the step. On the function we've just done, y equal cosine of 3x, we saw that the step should have been 30 degrees. So we type in 30 degrees. Now that I type in the function cosine of 3x, I can see that the graph is exactly the same.